Welcome, dear listener, to a quiet tale carried on the breath of the mist. Tonight, we journey with a lone traveler as he steps into the forest of shadows, a place of whispered legends and forgotten paths. Guided by a fragile light, he faces trials of the heart, where every shadow reveals a truth and every step carries the promise of redemption. Close your eyes. Let the gentle rhythm of the story soothe your thoughts, and allow the forest's whispers to guide you into a deep and peaceful sleep. Let us begin. They said that the path only appeared on nights when the moon hid herself from the earth. When the villagers whispered of it, their eyes grew wide, voices dropping to cautious murmurs as they described how the mist would rise at twilight, thick and silver, curling out from the forest's depths, like tendrils of ghostly fingers beckoning the lost and the lonely. They claimed no one who had stepped onto the path had ever returned, for it led into the heart of the forest of shadows, a place woven from the fabric of old curses and forgotten memories. It was a place where those seeking answers went only to lose themselves instead. The traveler, however, was not from the village. He knew little of its tales and even less of its superstitions, yet he felt that nameless pull, a quiet, irresistible tug, like a string tied to his soul, that led him to the edge of that mist-shrouded forest. His face, roughened by years spent under sun and storm alike, betrayed no fear, yet his eyes, half-lidded and hidden under the shadow of his hood, held a glint of uncertainty. He did not know what he was searching for, only that he had wandered for years across distant lands, following signs he could barely recognize and whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. And now, here he was, on the edge of a legend spun from darkness and fog, with no one to tell him to turn back. A lesser man might have heeded the chill that crawled up his spine, might have retreated to the warmth of the inn's fire and abandoned his restless search. But he was not a lesser man. He was instead a traveler who had lost more than he could remember, and who held on to a fading hope that somewhere, somehow, he might find himself again. As he stepped forward, the mist rose higher, twisting and curling around his boots. It clung to his ankles, its cold touch sharp and insistent, as if testing him, as if to say, "Are you truly ready for what lies ahead?" Yet he did not stop. The path wound deeper into the trees, the fog thickening until the world around him became nothing but grey shadows, faint and half-formed, whispering in tones too soft to be understood. Hours seemed to pass, or perhaps only moments. It was impossible to tell in the unchanging mist. There was only the crunch of leaves beneath his feet and the occasional rustle of branches above, though no wind stirred. The forest itself seemed to breathe, its dark pulse syncing with his own heartbeat. The ancient power within it, like an invisible weight pressing down on him. He might have wandered endlessly had it not been for the soft glow that appeared in the distance. A fragile light, no brighter than a candle flame, wavering and ethereal. The traveller paused, squinting through the mist, unsure whether it was real or a trick of his weary mind. But as he watched, the glow grew, and within it, a figure began to take shape, small and delicate, with wings that glistened as though dusted with dew. She was a fairy, though unlike any he had imagined from the songs and stories of his childhood. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes held an ageless depth, a knowledge that both comforted and unsettled. In her hands she cradled a 4-leaf clover, each leaf pulsing with a faint silvery light that lit up the mists around her. "Traveller," she said, her voice soft yet laced with an unearthly resonance that echoed through the trees. "You have entered the forest of shadows, a place where the lost find only what they bring within themselves. Yet I see something in you, an ember, faint but steadfast." The traveller stared at her, uncertain whether to speak or remain silent. But before he could decide, she held out the clover, her slender fingers extending it towards him. "Take this," she murmured, her voice almost lost in the fog, "for it is a gift that grants guidance and protection. The forest's trials will try to break you, but the light of this clover will guide you, if you let it." He reached out, his fingers brushing against hers as he took the delicate clover. And in that moment, he felt a warmth spread from the leaf into his hand, then up his arm, settling in his chest like the comforting glow of a distant hearth. The fairy's eyes softened, and a trace of a smile touched her lips, a smile filled with both sorrow and hope. "In return," she whispered, her voice a promise carried on a breeze he could not feel, "spread kindness wherever you go. For every shadow cast, a light must rise. That is the way of this world and of all others." And as the words left her lips, she dissolved back into the mist, leaving the traveller alone once more, with nothing but the fragile leaf glowing in his hand, a guide through the darkness, and a reminder of the promise he had yet to keep. With the clover's glow lighting his path, the traveller took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and ventured further into the forest of shadows, a lone figure moving through the mist, bearing with him a gift and a promise. The clover's soft glow illuminated the narrow path ahead, casting an eerie, silvery light that penetrated the dense fog. In that moment, the traveller felt as if he were holding a piece of the moon itself, a fragment of ancient magic bound within the delicate leaves of a 4-leaf clover. The air around him hummed with a faint, invisible energy, and he could almost sense the forest breathing, watching, testing his every step. The fairy's words lingered in his mind like a forgotten melody, each syllable twisting into the mist, intertwining with his own heartbeat. Spread kindness wherever you go. The simplicity of her command did little to ease his mind, for he knew that the path ahead held secrets far more complex and dangerous than a simple act of kindness could overcome. Yet, her voice remained, a whisper carried on the cold breath of the forest, reminding him of the promise he had made. With each step, the forest grew denser, the trees looming like silent sentinels, their branches clawing at the sky in twisted, skeletal shapes. Shadows stretched long and dark, and the traveler could almost feel them reaching for him, as if trying to pull him into their depths. But whenever the darkness drew too close, the clover's glow would brighten, warding off the shadows and guiding his steps. It was a quiet magic, subtle and fragile, yet it held the darkness at bay, allowing him to press forward. As he walked, the mist began to shift and pulse, forming vague shapes that danced at the edges of his vision. Faces almost human, eyes hollow and mouths open in silent cries. He tried to ignore them, focusing instead on the clover's light. But the faces grew clearer with each step, their expressions twisted with sorrow, longing and regret. Some reached out to him with pale ghostly hands, their fingers grasping at the air, as if begging for something he could not give. One figure, a young woman with hair like strands of moonlight, appeared before him, her face etched with an anguish that seemed to seep from her very soul. Her eyes, dark and empty, locked onto his, and for a moment he felt her pain as if it were his own, a hollow ache that gnawed at his heart, a sorrow that had no name. In that instant he remembered the fairy's words, and summoning the strength within him, he extended a hand to the spectre. His touch was met with a chill that sank deep into his bones, but he did not pull away. Instead, he whispered words of comfort, of warmth, of memories of sunlit days and laughter that echoed through forgotten halls. The ghost's hollow eyes softened, and as he continued to speak, her form began to dissolve, fading into the mist with a final grateful glance. With each lost soul he encountered, he repeated this gesture, offering a moment of solace, a reminder of kindness in a place that had long forgotten it. Each act seemed to make the clover's light grow stronger, and the path before him became clearer, the shadows less menacing, their dark whispers fading into silence. Yet, as he ventured deeper, the trials grew harder. The forest seemed to sense his resolve, and in return, it revealed visions meant to test him, to break the very promise he had made. At first, it was faint, a murmur here, a flicker of memory there. But soon the visions sharpened, and he saw images of his past, memories he had buried long ago. He saw himself, younger and fiercer, with a pride that burned like fire, leaving behind those who had once called him friend. He saw faces of those he had wronged, people who had trusted him, only to be met with his indifference, his ambition. The path shifted, twisting and spiraling into a labyrinth of regrets, each step bringing forth another forgotten transgression, each memory a weight pressing down upon his soul. His pace faltered, his resolve wavered. What kindness could he spread, he thought bitterly, when his own heart was stained by the shadows of his past. But as he looked down at the clover, its steady glow unwavering, he felt a flicker of something, a reminder that the fairy had chosen him for a reason, that she had seen something within him worth redeeming. With a heavy breath, he steadied himself, allowing the memories to wash over him, to fill him with the ache of regret. Yet instead of turning back, he embraced them, letting each memory pass through him like a river carving through stone. And as he did, he whispered words of forgiveness, not only to the faces that haunted him, but to himself. The clover's light grew warmer, its glow now mingling with a faint sense of peace that settled within him, dulling the sharp edges of his guilt. The forest seemed to acknowledge his resolve, and the path straightened, the shadows parting like a curtain as he continued onward. In the silence that followed, he felt lighter, the weight of his past lifting like mist under the morning sun. The forest had tested him, had tried to shatter him with his own darkness, but he had faced it with the fragile strength of kindness, a strength that even the shadows could not take from him. And so he walked, his steps surer, the clover's glow leading him deeper into the unknown, as the fairy's promise echoed softly in his heart. The traveller moved forward, his steps softened by layers of fallen leaves that blanketed the forest floor. The silence deepened as he journeyed further, the only sounds his own breathing and the faint, rhythmic pulse of the clover's light in his hand. He could feel the forest pressing around him, close and oppressive, like a darkness that fed on every flicker of light and hope. It was as if the forest itself were alive, watching, weighing his every movement, waiting for the moment his spirit would falter. Suddenly, the path veered sharply, leading him into a thicket where the trees grew densely together, their twisted trunks forming walls that seemed to close in around him. Shadows slithered and whispered, their voices low and indistinct, words blurring into one another like fragments of half-remembered dreams. The clover glowed brighter, and as it did, the shadows recoiled. But they did not vanish. Instead, they watched him with a silent, predatory patience, as though they knew they would have their chance soon enough. As he pushed forward, the traveller came upon a small clearing where a figure was crouched low, shrouded in a cloak of shadows. Its face was hidden, but its presence exuded a despair so deep that he felt it resonate within his own heart, like a long-forgotten sorrow stirring from the depths of memory. The figure raised its head, revealing hollow eyes that burned with an empty, haunting gaze. "I was once like you," it whispered, its voice brittle and worn, as if dragged through centuries of loneliness. A traveler seeking something beyond the forest's edge. But I lost my way, and in my despair, the darkness claimed me. It feeds on pain, on regrets left unspoken, and now I am but a shadow, bound to these woods, forever lost. The traveler felt a chill sweep over him, a warning carried on the silent currents of the mist. This figure was a warning, a spectre of what he himself could become if he allowed despair to take root in his soul. He reached out, holding the clover aloft, its gentle glow casting warmth across the figure's face. The light seemed to soothe the shadowed soul, easing the sharp lines of sorrow etched into its features. "Rest now," the traveler murmured, his voice softened by a compassion he hadn't known he possessed. "Let go of what binds you. You may find peace yet." The clover's light pulsed, and the shadow's eyes softened, the deep emptiness within them filling with a faint, fleeting hope. With a final grateful sigh, the shadow faded into the mist, leaving the traveler alone once more. But the forest was far from finished with him. It was as though his act of compassion had stirred something darker within its depths. The trees trembled, their branches twisting like the fingers of unseen hands, and the ground beneath him shifted, revealing a maze of roots and stones that snaked across his path. The clover's light flickered, struggling against the shadows that pressed closer, each one more relentless, more hungry. With each step, he faced new trials, specters that materialized before him, each one a twisted reflection of his own fears, doubts, and regrets. Some appeared as men and women he had once known, their faces twisted in anger or disappointment, their voices accusing, reminding him of every misstep he had taken, every person he had left behind. Their words clawed at his heart, each one a dagger of guilt and sorrow. Yet each time he held the clover high, its light pushing back the darkness, its warmth a reminder of the promise he had made. He reached out to each spectre, offering words of forgiveness and kindness, even when their eyes burned with fury or their voices dripped with bitterness. Slowly, his acts of compassion unraveled the shadow's hold, and one by one they dissolved into the mist, leaving him standing alone, his spirit weary but unbroken. But the forest's final test was the hardest yet. At the end of the path, where the mist gathered in thick, swirling clouds, he found himself standing before a reflection of his own self. A figure cloaked in shadows, eyes hollow and empty, like a mirror twisted by darkness. The figure watched him in silence, its presence heavy with despair and bitterness, every fault and flaw he had ever harbored laid bare. "Who are you?" the traveler asked, his voice a soft echo in the fog. The shadow smirked, its expression a cold mimicry of his own. "I am you. I am the side of you that feels the weight of every mistake, every moment of weakness. I am every doubt, every regret you tried to bury. It took a step forward, the darkness rippling around it like a living thing. Do you truly believe a handful of kind words and acts of compassion will redeem you? The shadows you cast are far deeper than a simple promise can repair. The traveler felt a tremor of doubt, the clover's light wavering in his hand. Yet he forced himself to meet the shadow's gaze, his own eyes filled not with defiance, but with acceptance. Perhaps you're right, he said quietly. But I carry this kindness not to erase the past, but to move forward. I made a promise, not to erase my shadows, but to keep them from consuming me. He held up the clover, its light steady and resolute. And that is enough. The shadow hesitated, its form flickering, the darkness unraveling as the light grew brighter. With a final shuddering breath, it vanished, leaving the traveler standing alone once more. The mist parted before him, revealing a new path, a path bathed in the first light of dawn, where the shadows dared not follow. With the clover's light shining brightly in his hand, the traveler stepped forward, his heart unburdened, his spirit stronger for the trials he had faced. As dawn's pale light touched the forest, the traveler's path led him to a vast clearing where a structure loomed tall and defiant against the sky. A tower, ancient and desolate, with walls of stone as dark as midnight, and vines twisted like tendrils up its sides. Stories he had heard long ago echoed in his mind. Stories of a place where the lost were said to gather, bound to the shadows for eternity. This was the Tower of Lost Souls. The traveler felt a chill seep into his bones, deeper and colder than any he had felt before. The clover's light, warm and steady in his hand, pulsed faintly, as if the magic within it recognized the heavy sorrow that clung to the stones. Steeling himself, he stepped forward, his gaze tracing the jagged stones as he approached the entrance. An archway, yawning like the mouth of a great beast, inviting him into its depths. Inside, silence reigned, thick and oppressive, broken only by a faint, echoing whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. Shadows clung to the walls, twisting and writhing, as though they bore witness to secrets that the light had never seen. The clover's glow dimmed, cautious, as if sensing the darkness that pervaded every corner of the tower. The traveler ascended the winding stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. The higher he climbed, the more he sensed the presence of souls, wisps of lightless forms that hovered in the air, their faces drawn with sorrow, their eyes empty and hollow. Some gazed at him with a longing that pierced his heart, others with bitterness, their expressions twisted with a regret that seemed to anchor them to the walls like chains. At each landing he would pause, meeting their eyes, his gaze softened by the promise he carried within him. One by one, he spoke to them, his words simple yet filled with a quiet compassion. Your journey does not end here. There is peace waiting beyond the shadows. He held the clover aloft, its light spreading a gentle warmth that eased the hollow ache in their expressions. And as he spoke, the clover seemed to share its magic with each soul, illuminating the darkest crevices of their being. Some of them began to fade, their forms dissolving into soft, glowing mist as their sorrows released them. He felt their relief like a faint warmth upon his skin, their final glances a gratitude beyond words. Yet the higher he climbed, the deeper the shadows grew. By the time he reached the top of the tower, the air was thick with sorrow so potent that it pressed down on his heart like a stone. Here he found the oldest and darkest of the souls, a figure cloaked in shadows, its form indistinct, yet unmistakably human. The figure turned to him, eyes dark as night, filled with an anger that had not softened with time. "You think your kindness can free us?" it sneered, voice cold and brittle. "You who carries his own regrets and sins like scars upon his soul. Your compassion is a lie, a feeble salve upon a wound that festers with darkness." The traveler felt the weight of the figure's words, each one sinking deep, stirring doubts he had tried to bury. He gripped the clover tighter, feeling its light flicker, and for a moment he was tempted to look away, to retreat from the harsh gaze of the soul that seemed to see through to the darkest corners of his heart. But then he remembered the fairy's words, the promise he had made, not just to her, but to himself. With a steady breath, he lifted the clover higher, its light piercing through the shadow that clung to the figure before him. "I do not claim to erase your pain," he replied, his voice quiet but unwavering. "Nor do I pretend that kindness alone can heal every wound. But I know this, even the smallest light can break the deepest darkness, and if my words can offer even a moment of peace, then they are not a lie." The shadowed figure stared at him, its anger flickering like a candle in the wind, struggling to hold on to the darkness that had kept it bound for so long. Slowly the traveler saw something shift in his eyes, a glimmer of something long buried beneath bitterness and sorrow. With a soft, shuddering sigh, the figure reached out, its fingers brushing against the clover's glow. The light spread, gentle and warm, seeping into the figure's form, dissolving the shadows layer by layer until there was nothing left but a faint shimmer of light that drifted away on the breeze. As the last of the lost souls faded into the dawn, the weight in the air lifted, and the tower felt less like a prison and more like a relic, emptied of its sorrow. The traveler felt a strange peace settle over him, the clover's light now steady and bright, filling him with a warmth that seemed to flow from the very heart of the magic it held. Turning to the open archway, he looked out over the forest, now bathed in the soft glow of morning, the shadows receding into the earth. their presence nothing more than a memory. He felt the fairy's presence, faint yet unmistakable, like a whisper at the edge of his mind. "You have kept your promise." Her voice drifted to him, gentle as a breeze. "Your kindness has lifted the shadows, not only from others but from yourself." With a final grateful glance at the clover, he tucked it close to his heart and began his descent. The tower now silent, the souls within it freed. As he reached the ground and stepped back into the clearing, the forest seemed brighter, the mist lifting like a veil, revealing the path that would lead him out of the shadows and into the light. As the traveler left the tower and re-entered the forest, the light of dawn filtered through the trees, casting long fingers of gold across the path. The clover in his hand pulsed faintly, a heartbeat of light in rhythm with his own. And he felt a calmness settle within him, as if the very forest, once so dark and foreboding, now welcomed him with open arms. He had journeyed through shadows, faced his deepest regrets, and freed those bound to the sorrow of this place. But the fairy's words lingered in his mind, her final request like a soft, unyielding echo: "Spread kindness wherever you go." He continued down the path, each step lighter than the last. He could feel the weight of his past lifting, uncoiling from his spirit. The burden of mistakes and regrets slowly transforming into something else. A quiet resolve, a peace that spread through his soul. Yet as he moved forward, he noticed a figure lying across the path ahead, barely distinguishable from the earth and fallen leaves. It was an old man, frail and worn, his face etched with lines of hardship and sorrow. His clothes were tattered, his hands weathered and calloused, as though he had spent a lifetime wrestling with the unforgiving earth. The traveler knelt beside him, feeling the faint, erratic beat of life beneath the man's skin. The old man's eyes fluttered open, and he looked at the traveler with a gaze clouded by both age and despair. Who are you?" the man whispered, his voice little more than a dry, cracked whisper. "Are you the end that has finally come for me?" The traveler shook his head, offering the man a gentle smile. "No, I am but a fellow traveler, passing through these woods as you are." The old man's eyes drifted to the clover, still glowing softly in the traveler's hand. He stared at it, as if entranced, his eyes filling with an almost childlike wonder. "That light," he murmured. "It's been so long since I've seen something so beautiful, so alive." The traveler glanced at the clover, its glow steady, as if it too sensed the sorrow in the old man's heart. Without hesitation, he extended his hand, holding the clover close to the man, letting its light fall upon him like a blessing. "Here," the traveler said softly, his voice carrying a warmth that seemed to fill the empty spaces of the forest. "Take this light. Let it guide you as it has guided me." The old man's hand trembled as he reached for the clover, his fingers brushing against its fragile leaves. As the light touched his skin, a faint glow spread from his hands, filling him with a gentle warmth that softened the lines of sorrow on his face, lifting the weight of years from his weary eyes. A tear slipped down his cheek, and he looked up at the traveller, his expression filled with both gratitude and disbelief. "I had forgotten what kindness felt like," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I have spent so many years wandering, searching for something I could never name. And yet, here you are, a stranger, offering me more than I could have ever dreamed." The traveller felt a quiet joy rise within him, a feeling he had not known since before he had entered the forest of shadows. The act of giving, of sharing the light with another, filled him with a peace that resonated deep within his soul, as if this, more than any trial, was the true purpose of his journey. For a moment, they sat in silence, the forest around them basking in the morning light, and the old man closed his eyes, breathing deeply, his face serene. When he opened his eyes again, there was a clarity within them, a light that mirrored the clover's glow. "Thank you," the old man said, his voice stronger now. "I do not know your name, nor the path you have walked, but your kindness will live on within me." The traveller simply nodded, feeling no need for words. He helped the man to his feet, steadying him as he found his balance. The old man gave him one last grateful look, then turned and walked down the path, his steps lighter, his spirit brighter. The traveller watched him until he disappeared into the trees, a lone figure illuminated by the soft morning light. The traveller stood in the clearing, a sense of fulfillment settling over him, for he had given away the very light that had once guided him through his darkest hours. Yet, he felt no emptiness, no loss. The clover's light, once bound to his hand, now lived on within his heart, as if kindness itself had become the new guiding force within him. As he continued his journey, he felt the presence of the fairy, her gentle laughter echoing softly in the breeze. "You have kept your promise," her voice seemed to whisper. "The light you carried was never meant to be kept. It was meant to be shared. And now, it will live on in every act of kindness you inspire, in every heart you touch." The traveller smiled, a quiet understanding settling within him. He would walk his path, not as a man bound by shadows or regret, but as one who bore the light of compassion in every step he took, a light that would guide him, even when the clover was but a memory. And so, with a heart unburdened and a spirit renewed, the traveller continued on his way, leaving behind only the whisper of a promise kept and the lingering warmth of a kindness shared.